Good morning, students. How are you? Hope you all are doing well. You're fine, you're healthy. So today we will be discussing about our next topic of the syllabus, which is the political economy of India, part two. So, the last lecture, if you've seen, you would have seen that the topic is similar, but this is the second part of the chapter. Now, we're talking about the political economy of India post 1991. The previous lectures had the talk about the political economy of India before 1991. All right. So now we will be looking at the needs of these reforms. Why were these reforms required at all? We would be looking at the objective of the new economic policy that was adopted post 1991. We would also be examining the major areas that required reforms and reforms were thus introduced in those areas. And we would also, at the end, try and evaluate the socio-economic and political impact that these economic reforms had on our society. All right. So we had discussed in the previous lecture that India chose a mixed economy model of development. I would like to request all of you that before you watch this lecture, please go on to the previous lecture and watch it. It will give you much more conceptual clarity because these two lectures are in sync of each other. You will only be able to grasp this lecture if you're thorough with the previous one. Okay. So, as I said that we've discussed in the last lecture that India adopted a mixed economic model of development because of Nehru's ideological inclination towards democratic socialism. After Nehru, Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, they made efforts to move the economy towards a more liberal path away from socialism. Under their leadership, the price control, import restrictions were all relaxed, and the private sector was involved more in the process of infrastructure development. Rajiv Gandhi, he focused on expanding the information technology sector, but these efforts were not enough as Indian economy was struggling from a very long-term constraints. Now, these long-term constraints combined with some immediate factors, it suddenly led to a massive fiscal and balance of payment crisis around 1989 to 1990s through 1991. So this was the time that India's economy became really stagnant. It required some long-term reforms. These crises pushed India into initiating a process of economic reform and structural adjustments. In July 1991, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, along with the then Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, initiated wide ranging economic reforms. These reforms were named as the New Economic Policy, and the reforms made way for more active participation of private sector by allowing more FDI in many of the sectors and ending public monopoly in many other sectors. So, although this was an effort to bring in the private players, and make them have an important role along with the public players, but it did not necessarily meant that the government withdrew from all the sectors it was working in. Certain sectors like railway, like defense, was still kept under the monopoly of the government, but other sectors which were not of strategic importance or which did not affect the national security integrity of the country or were not important for the sovereignty of the nation were open to the private sector. Now let us look at the reasons behind these reforms. So, what was the need to introduce these economic reforms? We'll be discussing the factors which were responsible for this, responsible for the crisis. The very first reason is the fiscal imbalance. Now, India had adopted a socialistic kind of model, and thus the government was spending huge sums of money on development as well as on the non development expenditure. Revenue deficit started rising at a very, very alarming rate. It rose from 0.2% of the GDP in 1981-82 to nearly 3.3% in 1990 and 1991. So you need to understand that 0.2 and 3.3% might just seem a 3% difference, but you also need to understand that the GDP, the amount of GDP we are talking about is in millions. So 3% of so many million rupees comes out to be a lot of money. So this 3% rise in the revenue deficit was pinching India. Fiscal deficit also started rising, and thus the government had to borrow money to make the public expenditure. Internal debt of the central government increased rapidly, rising straight from 35% of GDP at the end of 1980-81 financial year to 415.8% in 1990s and 1991. So these figures explain us really well that how the government was not able to meet its own expenditure requirements. So the government was earning less but spending more. So when you earn less and you spend more, how do you get that extra money to spend more? You will have to borrow. You'll either borrow from within the country or you will start borrowing from the international market. In whichever way you borrow, you are in a debt. Okay, so government of India was under a huge debt. The second reason was the worsening balance of payment situation. The current account deficit of India stood at $15.7 billion in 1990. Because of this, India's external debt rose to 23% of the GDP at the end of 1991. India's foreign reserves were sharply falling, and the government was ultimately forced to sell 20 tons of gold to the Union Bank of Switzerland in March 1991. The next reason in line was the Gulf crisis. Now, Iraq at this time invaded Kuwait in August 1990s, leading to a sudden inflation in the oil prices. This invasion also resulted in the fall of India's export to the Middle East and the Gulf regions. Fall in the foreign exchange earnings due to the fall in the export was also worsened later on as the situation proceeded. And this ultimately led to worsening of India's economic situation as well. So all this led to an alarming situation of foreign exchange. India's international credit rating was sharply downgraded, and it was becoming extremely difficult to raise credit abroad. Now, India has been borrowing to meet its daily expenditure, and India is not able to keep up well in the other parameters also. Our exports are lacking. We are importing more. The countries we have chose to import from are also in a war. They're invading each other. So everything, all the situation, political and economic, became so serious around us that there was speculation in the international market if India would be able to repay the debt it is taking. So India's credit rating was downgraded, which means that it was difficult for India to borrow more money from outside. Rising government expenditure in 1980s also raised the level of inflation in the country. Inflation was nearly 15% in 1990s. Despite India getting good monsoon for 3 consecutive years, the food prices was sharply rising. Heavy restrictions imposed by the public sector, like the long procedural steps, license Raj, etc., led to red tapeism in the system. It led to consumption delays, inefficiencies, losses, high cost of running the economy. Public sector was not able to manage the commercial segment well. So a lot of public sector units were going into losses. The main criticism of the public sector were the low rate of return on investment, declining contributions to the national saving, poor capacity utilization, overstaffing, bureaucratization. All this led to excessive delays and unnecessary wastage of the very precious and scarce resources that India had at that time. Finally, when the situation became so alarming that due to all the reasons that we discussed, the government could no longer ignore the situation. The government started looking for solutions, and it found many successful experiences of other countries which were India's neighbors. So many developing countries like India, for example, Malaysia, Thailand, China, South Korea, had all implemented the model of free market economy. And this made India rethink and change its policies towards the private sector. Later, the collapse and disintegration of Soviet Union and the Eastern European communist regimes further reinforced this trend of moving towards liberalism. India was forced to approach the World Bank and IMF to get a loan worth $7 billion of the money to help India to come out of this economic crisis. The condition that India had to meet in order to get this loan was that it had to open up its economy for the foreign players, and it had to pledge that it will not discriminate between the private sector and the public sector in any which way. Now, India agreed to this because India had absolutely no choice. And it also fulfilled this promise by adopting the economic reforms of 1991. So far we've understood that what were the situations like in before 1991 and what forced the government to take steps to frame this policy. So probably at that time, this policy was not framed wholeheartedly. There were a lot of compulsions. India was under a lot of pressure, but still we made most out of this policy, and we'll see in the further slides how this has benefited us. So first of all, in 1991 economic policy, there were clearly stated objectives. So what India wanted to achieve, what India wanted to get out of this policy was very clearly stated since the beginning. So we look at what were the objectives. First, to reduce the fiscal deficit to ensure an era of relative price stability. The aim was to increase the efficiency and the international competitiveness of our industrial production, to improve the performance and rationalize the scope of the public sector. Another aim was to liberalize the industrial policy and abolish the industrial licensing for most of the private industries. It encouraged the inflow of the foreign capital and technology by granting more concessions to the foreign investors. It also aimed to liberalize the foreign trade by reducing the quota restrictions in the case of imports. All right, so these were the objectives that the policy very clearly stated. Now, moving forward, let's look at some major areas of the economic reforms. The economic reforms of 1991 was a multi-dimensional package which focused on the industry, agriculture, financial sector, and so many service sector, so many other sectors. So this was not just aimed to improve one particular sector, but as the entire economy as a whole was to be improved. That was the objective. Now, there were two components of the new economic policy of 1991. First being the demand side management, and the second being the supply side management. All right. So focusing on the demand side management, as we may call it, the macroeconomic stabilization. These refer to short-term or medium-term measures to return to low or at least some stable inflation levels and rates to improve the balance of payment position. It includes the measures like fiscal correction, and reforms in the tax structure. Now, fiscal correction means the measures taken to reduce the fiscal deficit. Now, what is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is the excess of total expenditure of the government over its own revenue. It actually reflects the magnitude of the public debt. So fiscal deficit in simple language means the amount that you're earning and the amount you're spending has a difference. You are spending more than you're earning. So whatever is that more extra amount that you want to spend, you'll have to borrow it. So that becomes your fiscal deficit. Okay, so you'll have to borrow that money. The indebtedness of the government rose to 15.6% of GDP in 1990s. The fiscal policy correction included reducing the non-planned expenditure made by the government. Grants to be given out were reduced. Subsidies were also reduced or even removed in some of the items. Now, there were also reforms in the tax structure. These reforms were introduced on the recommendation of the Chelia Committee, which was set up to suggest the tax reforms. Tax structure reforms included rationalization of the income tax to bring it down to 30% from 51%. So income tax at the time was 51%, as high as 51% slab. So it was brought down to a maximum 30% slab. Custom duties were rationalized, which brought down the peak tariff duties to lower levels. Subsidies were reduced on various items like food, fertilizers, exports, etc. And the tax rates on the profits were also reduced, and this was done to attract the foreign players in the Indian market so that they can invest here and pay less taxes. Now, looking at the supply side management of the new economic policy, which is also called the structural adjustment approach. Now, these are long-term market-oriented reforms in the policies, institutions, which aim at resorting a sustainable BOP. BOP means balance of payment, reducing inflation, and creating conditions conducive for sustainable growth in the per capita income. So structural adjustment includes liberalization, privatization, and globalization, which refers to now, first of all, liberalization. What does liberalization mean? It is the economic policy which refers to reduction in the government regulation, removing all the unnecessary controls and the restrictive trade practices like requirement of permits or quota system or licenses or the quantitative restrictions, etc. And the privatization is defined as the transfer of function, activity, and organization from public to the private sector. Globalization means growing interdependence amongst the countries of the world, and this dependence can be of technology, capital, it can be of labor, of information, of any sort, or even goods and services. Now, it is the policy of integrating the domestic economy with the world economy. All right. Now moving towards the next topic. So now we're talking about the major reforms that were brought about in different areas, in different sectors. So starting with the industrial sector first. First of all, the industrial licensing policy was abolished for all the projects except for a list of 15 industries related to strategic, environmental, or some security concerns. Public sector was contracted as at a very large scale, and the number of industries reserved for the public sector had been reduced from 17 to just 3. So a lot of things were opened up for the private sector. The only industries reserved for the public sector are defense equipments, atomic energy, and the rail transport. It was decided that the budgetary support to the public enterprises would be progressively reduced. The sick public units were to be identified and would be shut if they're incurring heavy losses for some number of consecutive years. So the government finally decided that it will no longer continue in any business in which it is earning losses. Okay, reforms were also initiated in the small scale sector. So we were not just focusing on the industrial sector on a very large scale. We also wanted the industries to flourish at the local level, at the cottage level also. So investment limit of the small scale industry had been increased to 1 crore with a view of modernizing them. Relaxations were made in the provisions of the MRTP Act, the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which is popularly known as the MRTP Act. Okay, the threshold limit of the asset in respect of the MRTP Act, all the firms were now at par with each other and did not require any prior approvals from the government for investment in the delicensed industries. So the new Competition Act gave more emphasis on the prevention and control of the monopolistic, restrictive, unfair trade practices. Moving on to another sector of reforms, that is the financial sector reforms. So before the economic reforms, RBI exercised a huge amount of control on the banking sector in India. Now, how was this control exercised? It was exercised either through high level of cash reserve ratios, statutory liquidity ratios, or high bank rates. Now, liberalization of the financial sector included the following points, the following steps. The first of all, RBI's role shifted from that of a regulator to that of a facilitator of the financial sector. So RBI was not dictating everything now. RBI was not acting like a monitor. RBI was acting like a facilitator, a guide. It started shifting its approach towards hand-holding. Both CRR and SLR ratios were reduced so that commercial banks have more funds at their disposal to lend. Now, what I'll briefly explain you what is CRR and what is SLR. You can see on the second point on your screen. These are two economic tools in the hands of RBI that RBI uses to convince or to order the banks, the commercial banks, to either increase the money they lend or decrease the money they lend. Okay, I'll explain you in brief. So RBI fixes a CRR or SLR percentage or a ratio. Okay, so the banks, for example, they have a fund of 100 crores. Okay, the people who deposit their money with the bank keeps it, right? Bank keeps it safe. So for example, at one particular day, a bank has 100 crore rupees as a deposit of its account holders. All right. So now that 100 crore rupees, it is at the disposal of this commercial bank. Okay, but this commercial bank cannot invest this entire 100 crores somewhere to earn money. RBI says that a certain ratio, which can be CRR or SLR, has to be kept safe and in a liquid form Okay, so that whenever a depositor comes and asks for his money back, the bank has that amount to give him back. All right. So the bank doesn't say that, oh, we don't have any money. We've already lended your entire money to somebody. All right. So to prevent this situation, RBI is the one which decides and instructs the bank to keep a certain amount of money with them in liquid or cash form, so that whenever the depositor comes, the money can be paid back to him if he demands. Okay. Now, the government also now allowed the foreign institution investors, such as the merchant bankers, to invest in the Indian financial markets. Private sector banks were allowed to establish, not just Indian, but even the foreign players could now open banks in India, provided that their FDI limit was below 50% of the capital invested. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, which is popularly known as the SEBI, was also established in 1988, which defined the responsibilities for the development and regulation of the stock market. So here we're done with the brief of financial reforms. Moving on to the next category of reforms, which is reforms in the sector of foreign exchange. In order to solve the immediate problem of balance of payment crisis, rupee was devaluated against the foreign currencies. Now, devaluation means, so you'll find a lot of economic terms in this chapter because yes, we're talking about the political economy. So here the term devalued means that deliberately when a currency is pegged at a lower value in comparison to the other currencies in the world, it's known as devaluation. This makes the goods being imported from India a lot more cheaper as compared to the other countries. Increased exports also increased India's foreign exchange reserves, and rupee value determination was also freed from the government control and subjected to the market determined exchange rate. So the government also decided not to manipulate our currency any further, and currency was also liberalized. That let the currency be decided according to the international market, according to the demand and supply rules of the international currency market. Approval was given for the direct foreign investment up to 51% in the foreign equity in high priority industries and automobile permission, and automatic permissions were given. I'm so sorry. Automatic permissions were given for the foreign technology agreements in high priority industry up to a lump sum payment of rupees 1 crore. So now the Indian industries were absolutely free in certain areas to collaborate with their foreign players, with their counterparts in the other countries, so that the technology can be shared, so that India gets access to the improved technology which is being used in the other countries. In the areas of trade also, there were reforms that were introduced. So before 1991, India's trade policy was framed on the lines of protectionism, which means that there were quantitative restrictions and high tariffs on imports, import licensing, and even export duties. Okay, so the trade reforms aimed at abolishing the requirements of import licensing system, except in the case of hazardous or some environmentally sensitive industries, if there are any. Quantitative restrictions on the imports were also removed, and tariff rates were also reduced. All this led to strengthening of the export promotion structure. All right. There were two major reforms apart from liberalization, which is privatization and globalization. Now, privatization as a goal was achieved through the disinvestment in the public enterprises. Disinvestment means selling a part of the shareholdings held by the government in public sector to a private entity. In India, this investment was done for two main reasons. The first was to provide fiscal support to the government to improve the efficiency and accountability of the public sector. So what were the two main reasons? Why did the government wanted to privatize? Why did it want to sell its own businesses and its own enterprises? The first reason was that the government was in a lot of debt. Okay, government had to repay a lot of money that it had borrowed. Right, we read about fiscal deficits, revenue deficit, how government was spending more than it was earning. So at that time, government had taken a lot of loans. So those loans need to be repaid now, right? So in order to repay them, the government wanted to sell its enterprises, and whatever money they'll get from the selling of this enterprise would be used to pay off the debts. So the first reason was that the fiscal debt was to be removed. Okay, the fiscal deficits were to be cleared. The second was that we learned that how due to bureaucratization or due to other things, due to a lot of red tapeism in the public sector, or the public sector's efficiency was reduced. So government thought that if it would be handed over to the private sector, maybe the efficiency, the quality, the outcomes would improve. Okay. And through globalization, India meant taking efforts to integrate India into the global trade and commerce by adopting appropriate policies. Okay, globalization means that you want to be an active part of the entire globe. You want to interact with the entire globe on regular basis, may it be in exchanging of information, goods, services, or in the matters of defense or anything else. Now, we should not look at these economic reforms in isolation. So far, we've been talking about what the reforms have been in the trade sector, in the foreign investment sector, how we have improved. But then we should not be looking at these economic reforms just in isolation and see what good they have done to the economy only, right? Because they had also had a huge impact on the social as well as the political life of our society. Okay, so far it is clear that the new economic reforms introduced in 1991 were a major departure from the Nehruvian model of development. Despite the fact that these reforms were introduced by a minority government, they were widely accepted by most of the parties. The economic reforms aimed at not just accelerating the economic growth, but they also promised a reduction of population living below the poverty line and reducing the disparity between the rich and the poor states of India. The first immediate impact of these reforms were on the GDP growth of India. The growth rate was in 1993, 94 to 1997 and 98 was averaged out near 7%. But later, after these reforms were fully implemented, it nearly doubled. The growth rate was 15%. The service sector also grew at a very, very fast rate. In fact, service sector led the India's post-reform economic growth. It contributed to as much as 615% of the total growth in the GDP between the year 2002 to 2015. In the service sector itself, the main growth areas were information technology. So IT became the main lead point, including call centers, software designing firms, the BPOs. India soon emerged as a global leader in the business services. These reforms also helped India in integrated with the world economy. Adopting the liberalization, privatization, and globalization helped India integrate with the rest of the world really well. And the foreign exchange was $39 billion in 2000, and it jumped to $2,915 billion in September 2015. However, when all the economic parameters are growing at a very constant rate, at a very steady rate, and the figures are showing that the country is progressing, the rate of poverty reduction was very, very slow. So things were not going as they were expected. We were earning more, our growth rates were more, GDP was more, but not necessarily all the poor were being pulled out of the poverty. The total number of people below the poverty line, nearly 300 million in the year 2004 and 5, against 320 millions in 1993, 1994. So nearly in 10 years, we were only able to pull 20 million people out of poverty. 300 million people were still in poverty. Over these years, the unemployment rate also rose many folds, and we have to consider the economic reforms that brought about a technical upgradation with it. We cannot ignore that. But it was difficult for everyone in the working class to adopt to these rising changes. So when we were integrating ourselves with the rest of the world, when we were trying to become technologically advanced, sharing of information, opening up borders. So India needed to be very competitive. We required a workforce which was up to date with computer skills, with the scientific skills. And we cannot ignore the fact that India had been behind in the technological progress for years. And our school education curricular at that time did not involve teaching of computers or basic knowledge about the working of the technology, right? So this hampered it made some of a section of our employable people handicapped. So there was a scheme of voluntary retirement, which was introduced to load off the workers in both the public and the private sector. Consequently, the workers were pushed into unorganized sectors from a secured to an insecure employment. During the 7 years post-reform period of 1991 to 1997, a total of 16 lakh workers were laid off. The economic reforms, they focused our attention to the service sector and industry. This led to agriculture being neglected completely. Public investment in the sector, especially the infrastructure part, which includes irrigation, improvement of the power supply, or providing roads and other market linkages and research, was reduced in the reform period. The sluggish growth had led to rural distress. Most of India's population lived in villages, and the farmers found themselves into a crippling debt due to low farm incomes. Now, this led to the migration, farmer suicide rates were going up. Liberalization has forced the small farmers to compete with the global market where prices of the goods have fallen because of better production techniques, and subsidies have been taken away from these farmers. So, what do? Their product and their prices are no more competitive in the global market where they have to compete and sell their products. The economic reforms also did not meet the expectation of the industrial sector. The growth of industrial sector was not as much as it was planned. The next impact was on different regions. The reforms led to regional disparities. The economic inequalities had widened along the regional and the rural urban class divides. Backward states with a higher population growth were not able to attract investment, both in private or public sector. This may be due to the poor infrastructure that they had, or they lacked the availability of skilled labor. The states which were wealthy enough to develop their infrastructure to train their labor were able to attract more investments, obviously from the private sector and the public sector as well. So there were only 5 states: Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu, which accounted for 75% of the total FDI in India since liberalization. So you can see how a very a small percentage of states were taking away 75% of the FDI that India was getting. So this itself makes it clear that what was the level of disparity between regions when it comes to the investments that were being made. Now, this had shifted the economic power of the country in the hands of few states. Economic disparities led to social inequalities also. The economic reforms have also impacted the working of the federal system in India. The states, instead of competing for getting more funds from the central government, started competing for attracting more FDIs. Now, due to the above discussed features of the new economic policy, I'm sure you must have understood that everybody was not happy with it. All right, so there have been rising concerns about the government promoting the commercial interests of the corporate sector at a cost of the poor sections of the society. There have been protests in the country against the land acquisition for building of special economic zones and different mining projects also. Tribals, the people who have lost their land, their culture, were destroyed, who lost their jobs, were also angered by the decision of the government to implement these reforms. And in the end, we can only conclude by saying that yes, the economic reforms did bring about a rapid economic growth in India. It improved India on many parameters like imports, exports, foreign exchange earning, the balance of payment crisis, improving the fiscal deficit, revenue deficit situations. But this growth was not always equitable. Everybody did not receive the benefit of this growth equally. And it was not benefiting everyone in the society. And at the same point, it even widened the gap between rich and the poor in many ways. Growth has not been successful in generating the required level of employment for the youth of this country. The expansion of service sector could only absorb the skilled people. Although the government has been trying to introduce a lot of social welfare policies, yet it will take much more time and much more concerted, focused effort to reach our goal of equitable employment opportunities, equitable amount of resource distribution. So we need to work really, really hard to achieve this goal. So now there's another kind of policy that is required. I think we are required to upgrade this economic reform to improve our situations further. So with this, we finish with this chapter. Thank you so much and all the very best.